Continuing with Mishnah 3, we started yesterday. Rabbi Chanina ben Tradion had mentioned that two people who are sitting together and do not have anything Torah related in their discussion or sitting together, that is considered like a moshav leitzim, a sitting together, a group of scoffers in a sense. And the Mishnah, will just read it again because there was a second part. So first it was two people who are sitting together and there was no Torah between them. That was considered a moshav leitzim, a company of scorners. And there was a quote from the Psalms, from Tehillim, moshav leitzim lo yoshav. Then he said, Avol shanayim sheyoshvin v'yesh beinim. If you have two people who are sitting together and there is between them divrei Torah, shechina shrui beinim, God's presence rests between them, amongst them. And he quotes a verse, Shenemar oz nidberu yirei Hashem. Then spoke those who are fear of Hashem, Ish el reyehu, one person to another. Hang on a second. Ish el reyehu, v'yakshev Hashem v'yishma. Hashem heard, and he wrote it in a book of memory before him. Hang on, we just have to let somebody in. I'm able to do that. There we go. Okay, so there's a difference. Two people who are, God's presence is literally resting amongst them. And then the last part of the Mishnah just mentions, what about one? It says even one person gets rewarded. But it's in terms of engaging in Torah. So, every more Rabbi Tversky points out that every day we say a bracha on Torah. We say the bracha for learning Torah, besides Asher Bacha Banu Mikol Ha'amim, which are familiar with the same bracha when we get an aliyah to the Torah. But every morning we say La'asok b'divrei Torah, to engage in the words of Torah. And the idea of being engaged is not just studying, but everything we do is connected. We mentioned yesterday when even the idea of the two people sitting together didn't necessarily have to be that they were studying Torah. It just had to be that they're engaged in something that's Torah related. It could be even tzedakah, chesed, talking about some mitzvah, whatever it might be. All of that is also considered Torah, and therefore engaged is when we conduct our lives. Everything we do, how are we doing it? Are we doing it with the understanding that this is what the Torah wants? And that's considered being engaged in Torah. So when it talks about the opposite, two people sitting and not being, it means they're just wasting time. They're engaged in absolutely purposeless activity. And that with the term let, the scoffer or the scorner, is because those people don't take anything seriously. A person who's a real scoffer, everything they put down. That's the idea of being engaged. So the second part told us, though, that God's presence is there. The Tiferes Yisrael actually has an interesting point. He says, what it means that God's presence is there is that, we know that there's something called hashgacha pratit, which is divine providence, and that everything we do is somehow God is making things, he's maneuvering. What the people who are together and engaged in Torah, God is enlightening them to be able to see it. Because sometimes there's a big difference. It's happening. The question is, do you recognize it or not? Do you recognize God's hand in your life? So some people recognize it more than others. I actually also remember when we were in Israel on one of our trips, saying that in Israel, you feel it more, you can recognize it, you see the hand of God more than any place else as well. But it's a matter of paying attention to what's going on around you. The more we pay attention to God's hand, the more we will actually see it. And he says, therefore, the people who are together engaged in Torah, God will allow them to see his providence more clearly. And that's the idea of the verse that was quoted. Additionally, the Tosfos Yontif points out that when you have two people who are actually learning together, so and he actually, go back a second, is the idea that the people who are learning together, they are going to see the God's presence. But so the difference between before, when we said they were like scoffers, is someone who's a let, someone who's a scoffer, someone who doesn't really appreciate anything, they don't really see God's presence even in life. But someone who is I'm saying even after they die, they don't even recognize because they're not going to be rewarded. Whereas someone who is a righteous person, and even you see God's presence in your life. You don't have to wait till after we get to heaven to see God's presence. You can see it in your daily life. The other point that Rabbeinu Yonah points out is that the verse that was quoted is actually not referring to now, it's referring to the world to come, that in the world to come, when the righteous will be sitting, how we understand that, and everyone will see, wow, look at those people that earned a seat in heaven next to God, and they'll say, what did they do? And the answer will be because they spoke together words of Torah. And therefore it was written, as the verse had said, it was written in the book of remembrance, and they got a reward for that. And the idea is when you're studying, you're also talking it out. When two people are together, you're talking it out. When one person is learning by themselves, most of the time you're just silent. You're not talking it out, and talking it out is a higher level. It's also the way the wording is there. The word that was used in the verse that was quoted was word vidom. Vidom is to be silent, and but sometimes silence is not being totally quiet. Sometimes silence is a low sound. So again, when a person learns, you don't even if you're not silent, many times you're saying it, but you're saying it low, especially when you're yourself. Two people together, they're going to be, especially go to a base medrash where people are learning in chavrusa and partners, they're raising their voices. Sometimes you raise your voice because a lot of people there you have to raise your voice to be heard, but in other times you get so into it that you are raising, you're like you're shouting at each other because you're engaged in the what we call the fight of Torah, melchama shel Torah. I'm gonna try to say I understand it this way. You're gonna try to say you understand it that way. We're gonna and so that's when two people are together. You don't have that when one person's by themselves. One person's by themselves, it's much quieter. So even though there are many people who will actually read aloud when they study, but it's not the same as when you have two people together. And finally, the point the Maharal points out here is that really, again, Torah study really involves interaction. It's not just sitting by yourself is okay, but interaction with another person. And therefore, when it talks about divrei Torah, words of Torah, so that means there's people talking to each other. Because again, when you're by yourself, you don't have that give and take. And therefore, in the Mishnah, you don't have it on the screen, but in the Mishnah, when it talked about one person, it used the word osek. And when it used osek batorah, which you're engaged in it, you can be engaged even in your thinking. But when it talked about the two people, it talked about divrei Torah, words, because when two people are doing it, it's going to be oral and you're going to be having a conversation. And again, going back to the bracha that we make every day, it's using the word la'asok, because when we make the bracha on learning Torah, it's for ourselves, it's individual. Not to say that we aren't going to learn with others, but it's an individual bracha for yourself, and therefore the terminology that is used is the terminology that applies to the individual himself. And we'll have to hold it here for today.